Welcome to Digging Deeper Ag Chats with Al, the podcast where we explore the people, practices and big ideas shaping Australian agriculture. Today we're joined by John Francis, who is the director of Arista, a farm consultancy business based in Wagga Wagga. John's career has taken him from jackaroo in agronomy to helping some of the country's most progressive farmers better understand the financial engine of their business. Through benchmarking and whole of business planning, John and his team help producers turn production into profit without losing sight of the big picture. In this episode, we dive into what benchmarking really means, how to turn data into insight, and why slowing down might actually be the most productive thing you do this season. We'll also cover decision making under pressure, risk, and how numbers, when used well, can transform a farm business. So let's dig in. Welcome today to Digging Deeper, our special guest, John Francis. Pleasure to have you in.
Thanks for having me, Alistair.
And we also have Jen Smith, General Manager of Gippsland Ag, here as well. Welcome, Jen.
Thanks, Al. Good to be here.
Would you like to introduce? You're the one that was sitting in the meeting today, Jen. Let you introduce.
I sure would. Today on Digging Deeper, we have a dynamic guest, a former jackaroo and agronomist who was unhappy advising farmers on seed and fertiliser investments without fully understanding the architecture of the whole farm business. So he turned his mind to further education and farm management consultancy. John's taken a keen interest in learning the value of integrating scientific knowledge with financial management. Welcome to Digging Deeper, John.
Thanks for having me, Jen. Looking forward to it.
John, you're the director of Arista, a consultancy firm based in Wagga Wagga, New South Wales, and you guys run one of the more notable farm benchmarking programs in Southern Australia. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and your work?
Yeah, so we work with producers across southeastern Australia. The production systems are fairly consistent in the areas that we work. We're primarily focused on improving profitability. We start by understanding the farm owners or managers' sort of goals, and then we sort of pair back into their production systems and get an understanding of what they've got capability-wise with regards to the resource base and the skill base and so on, and then we go on a little bit of a journey together to try and set some targets and achieve those targets. So a lot of what we do is about monitoring their progress and assisting them in achieving some realistic goals.
Yeah, fantastic. And as Al said, we're in the room today with 10 producers from across Australia, from across Gippsland, and production and profit were very much on the table. Can you tell us a bit about the relationship between those two and how your work in benchmarking helps farmers better understand the drivers from both a profit and a production perspective in their farm system?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of people that have got a good grasp on production, but perhaps let the cost structure go a little bit. And I think where we probably really enjoy to play in terms of the space we play in is marrying the two. So, you know, being cognizant of the financial performance as well as that productivity and production performance. How do they integrate? Well, a lot of the profitability is driven by a good production system, and I guess our expertise is largely in livestock production systems, and that usually means optimising or utilising the feed base in a sensible manner, one that's suitable to the resource base. And so what we typically do is sort of look at what is the resource base, what is it actually capable of doing, what are the production systems that best allow for a matching of feed supply with feed demand. And then we try and build out a system that allows people to actually optimise feed utilisation. Now, the output of that is stocking rate, kilos of beef per hectare, lamb per hectare, wool per hectare. The output of that is a low cost of production, and the output of that is a reasonable margin maintained on every kilo. So it's important, I guess, that there's some level of financial literacy for those managers, because we're not just talking a journey of production, we're really talking a journey of production and financial performance. And so I think some people get the financial performance part right, or in the absence of really understanding the production system, and others get the production system right without understanding the financial performance. I think it's the integration of the two that actually matters. And one of the powerful things about looking at your numbers in a certain way is that it actually allows you to bring those two together and really derive some powerful insights. One of the things that I've recently learnt is that there's a continuum moving from sort of data to information to knowledge and wisdom. And part of that, the continuum starts with data. Some people only ever play in that data space, and I think that's dangerous because you tend to make reactive decisions and it tends to be a high risk area to sort of make decisions in. As you move from data to information, and a lot of that benchmarking data and projecting or presenting your numbers in a farm management sort of manner with key performance indicators, which are production key performance indicators, it actually moves you from that data space to the information space. But that's not where it ends. It's actually more than that. The next step is, right, now I've got some information, I've now got to derive some insights out of it. And that's where hopefully people like ourselves sort of have some insight and deliver some value in taking that information, which has now moved the data from just numbers on a page to numbers with context. That context might be comparing you with someone else or looking at, you know, where the optimum is and that sort of thing. And now I move into that knowledge space. And finally, when you get into that implementation, well, now I've moved knowledge to wisdom. So it's a real continuum. And what we're trying to do is take people on that journey from data, disaggregated bits of information everywhere where my head's overloaded, into information, insights, knowledge and wisdom. That's really the journey.
Okay, I think you've answered my next question inside that first part, but if we wind back a little bit, benchmarking by itself, what exactly is benchmarking for someone that hasn't been part of a benchmarking group before?
Yeah, great. Well, benchmarking is just comparison. It's a comparison of one thing with another. So if I can give you some context by taking a different industry. Do you watch AFL or like it?
Played it, watch it,
right.
love it. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So you're right on my page. That's great. Right. The AFL, I reckon, does a brilliant job of benchmarking. So what they do is they grab the performance of every individual within not only a team but the whole league, and they put up the number of, well, you'll know the lingo, touches, the number of whatever they are,
marks, tackles,
kicks, marks,
clangers,
yeah. Thank you, exactly, all those things. And then you, as a punter on the sidelines, could go onto their website and drag in player A versus player B and look at the comparison. Now, imagine the accountability that goes with me being a player and I'm playing head-to-head on someone else. I get to look at all their strengths and all their weaknesses. And guess what the other player's doing? Exactly the same. They're looking at all their strengths and all their weaknesses. Now, guess what they're going to do? They're going to exploit those strengths and weaknesses. They're going to try and avoid the strengths and play to the weaknesses. And that's exactly what we're doing when we're actually benchmarking a farm business. So rather than the clangers and the kicks and all the rest of it, we're putting numbers up which might be profit per hectare, it might be kilos of beef per hectare, it might be labour efficiency, it might be stocking rate, it might be all sorts of things. And then we're comparing against a cohort of others. And then that comparison allows us to look at the strengths of those other businesses and identify what I can do better. So just as the AFL player goes in and says, right, well, I can play better on this guy if I do X, Y, and Z, we're doing the same. What can I do better in my business? So benchmarking is just about identifying opportunity, and then the next step is you actually implementing some change and exploiting that opportunity.
So is benchmarking always against another business, or can you do it in your own business from year to year?
Yeah, so I want to separate out here benchmarking, which is a comparative analysis, from a set of management accounts with production KPIs. So the first part of the journey to benchmarking, and you can benchmark anything. We've just said that we can benchmark AFL player performance. What we're doing is benchmarking our farm performance and different components. But in order to do that, we first have to get our numbers in an orderly manner. The way we get our numbers in an orderly manner is that we present a set of management accounts. Management accounts are slightly different to compliance accounts because what they do is actually look at real market values, and they just present the numbers in a little bit different manner. And it's a more powerful way of actually making business decisions. In addition to that, we then add a whole range of production parameters or production outputs, which, as I said, might be your stocking rate, it could be your labour efficiency, it could be the kilos of beef per hectare or wool per hectare or lamb per hectare and those sorts of things, or it could be kilos per DSE. They're all just numbers that allow us to derive insights. The next step is the comparison part. So you don't have to compare yourself with anyone. Just getting that year-on-year performance of my management accounts with my key performance indicators might be a great pathway to you. We've just had a super dynamic day down here with 10 businesses in the room, open book. Everyone's looking at everyone's numbers, and I think the power is in the sharing of that information. So that's when you start to get some really powerful insights about the way other people are doing it. Now, then what we do is compare with a cohort of really profitable producers. And so you're not only looking at someone else's business, you're looking at a cohort of really profitable businesses and you're trying to derive insights. So you don't have to benchmark against anyone else. You can just benchmark your own business year on year, or you can choose to form a group. I think there was some really good feedback today about the power of a group and what value it added. There was some really good insights about that. So I think a group adds a lot of value.
Yeah, John, you were in the room today. 10 businesses are part of the Gippsland growth group. For those guys today, you applied the Arista benchmarking methodology and you worked through some of those businesses. So these are Gippsland beef and sheep and trading businesses. What were your insights from those businesses?
Yeah, look, I think there's some businesses that are really pushing production here, which is great to see. I just love seeing people pushing the limits. There are some challenges. It was a 23-24 year, so I think there was a lot of challenges around that commodity price, sort of part of which was a feature of that 23-24 year. And we discussed in quite a lot of depth what levers we've got to pull to actually deal with those challenges. So my view is that we're in a commodity production sort of business, and so the levers you've got to pull are really by driving production at a sensible cost structure, and I think that comes with feed utilisation. Some of the insights I derived today were that some people are doing that well, others are pushing a lot of production from a fairly high cost structure, and so they're not keeping much of the margin to them. There's high turnover, and there's other businesses in there that have got a lot of low-hanging fruit yet to come, which is great. You know, a lot about these meetings is actually finding where the next gain is. One of the things about groups is you've got people that have already taken the low-hanging fruit. It's harder for them. Every incremental gain comes at a higher cost, so it's really hard. Whereas those ones that aren't performing well, I just think, wow, that's opportunity, because they've got all the low-hanging fruit in front of them. They've got 35% gains, and sure, it might cost you 7% to go and borrow the capital, but far out, that's a big gain to be had. So, and it's the sum of all those individual decisions that actually delivers a better return over the whole business. It was a really powerful day. There was lots of debate about different systems, and people have got different beliefs about their own trajectory. That's healthy. And the healthy part is, provided that we're having the debate and discussion in a constructive manner, then, you know, I think you really get a lot out of the day. But I guess you guys can be the judge of that.
Yeah, well, you be the judge. How did Jen Smith and Smith Graziers go?
Oh, look,
they at the top, were they?
Yeah.
Or?
We don't divulge what goes on. What goes on in the room stays in the room. You know, we've got a bit of Chatham House rules here. But look, I'm yet to find a business where there's not opportunity. And so, you know, the good thing for me was every one of those businesses in that room had opportunity. And I think the journey that this group is going on has only just started. What I'll be excited to is check in 10 years, because a lot of them are going pretty hard. They're They're having a fair old crack. They're making me feel uncomfortable, and not that that's quite hard. I'm a bit risk averse, but they're certainly having a red hot go. They're not going to die wondering. So it's really, I think it'll be a really interesting next few years to see how they end up.
And look, I had a terrific experience, with my business partner in the room there today, and your data is showing that consistently farm business who benchmark return 2 to 3% higher returns on assets managed. John, can you tell us a little bit about what's driving that advantage and Agristar's benchmarking methodology?
Yeah, so I don't know whether that's a symptom or a cause, meaning, we do actually typically have a bit of a bias sample there. So people start the journey of wanting to look at their numbers to explore and get better and improve their performance. So I do think some of what we might be seeing is just a bit of a bias sample. But I think the other part is that triangle or pyramid that I talked about is actually part of it. What you're doing is moving from that data, reactionary, challenging, high-risk decision-making to information and knowledge, where I'm now making more informed decisions, a bit more anticipation of what's going on, building my system a little bit better. So I think there's a bit to say for that. And I'm not convinced it's all necessarily causal, but some of it is symptomatic of moving from that data disaggregated space to a bit more information and knowledge. What was the second part of that question?
So for producers who are thinking about wanting to start on that benchmarking journey, how would they go about that, and what is your process to taking producers on that journey?
Yeah, so I think the starting point is actually to make a phone call, but interestingly, I look back through the number of people that ring us and get to the point of saying, right, I really need to benchmark my business, and them actually doing it is two different things. So they've made a cognitive decision to actually do it, and then they might sit on that for 6 months before they actually take the action to get over. So it's a slow and steady process, and there'll always be an excuse. Oh, this year wasn't good because my system's going to change next year, or wasn't good because so-and-so came into the business, or we expanded the business. I guess my real message is just get into it. And as soon as you do it, what you realise is I should have done it 5 years ago, not this year. And then with regards to the process can be a little bit daunting, but that's okay. There's people there to help you through it. So we've got a team now that in the past we sort of sent a very complex spreadsheet out to people and said, go your hardest, just fill it in. And believe it or not, they didn't like that. Surprise.
Why,
yeah, that's right, Alistair. But now we've got more people in the business who are actually guiding them through that process. We've realised that numbers aren't everyone's gig, and they need a bit more support. And it's been very friendly to us, that process, because basically what it's meant is we've got higher retention rates, we've got people that actually understand, and that process is actually part of the learning as well. People only need to be shown once how to enter the data, and then they're off. I can see how you've done that. Now I'm into it. So it's I think that we've learnt a lot about how we can do it better. And I think servicing the people who aren't necessarily as familiar as we are with the numbers is really important. So we've got to take ourselves out of that space of being comfortable with numbers to putting ourselves into, here's someone not comfortable with numbers. How can we make it a friendly process for them?
I can understand the hesitation to start that, especially if you think that you might have all the low-hanging fruit. To have that laid bare is sometimes, I guess, a bit daunting. I love stories. Can you tell us a story, without using names obviously, where you've come into a business, done some benchmarking, there's been an obvious change that needed to be made, you've made it, and how that's helped the business?
Yeah, okay. So I can think of one in the room that might get there pretty quickly, but if I leave that one aside, there's a business that I work with that's reasonable scale. They're a breeding business, beef breeding business, and they were selling a lot of they're carrying over steers through winter, so getting a lot of weight onto sort of processing type animals. Now, the cost of carrying those steers over is a lot of feed consumption for a very marginal gain in weight. What we proposed was, let's sell those steers earlier and run more cows. And the output of that was a production system that utilised feed better, because they were selling those steers in July, August. They were leaving all the September, October, November, December feed, which is where 50 to 60% of your feed's grown, unconsumed. Well, it was still consumed, but not at the rate it needed to be. And they weren't getting remunerated appropriately for those extra kilos. So they might have been getting 30 cents extra per kilo, but they needed $1.30 to actually warrant that. So we looked at the system and said, well, what if we run more cows? What if we don't bother trying to take those steers out to those really heavy weights? Let's pare it back and get those steers just back to feeder type weights. They'll go out in December, we'll use all our feed, and then we'll just have the cows and the weaners carrying through the following. So it's a systems change. And a lot of what I do is about systems architecture. It's all about better consuming the feed. Now, what that resulted in is the number of kilos per hectare moved from, I can't remember, it was around 325 kilos per hectare, so a very high rainfall area, up to 420 to 450 kilos. And we're going to target 500 kilos out of that business. What that meant was I got to dilute my cost structure. It did mean I had to go and buy more cows to actually... So it took investment and considerable investment. But once I got over that hump, I'm now getting that return in perpetuity. So what we did was pulled cost of production back from $2.50 a kilo. I can't remember the exact numbers, but back closer to $1.50 a kilo with a lot more kilos out of the system. So we lost a little bit of the income. So we weren't getting paid as much for all the kilos that went out, but we got a lot more kilos out of the system. More kilos with a lower margin, delivered, and, still a labour efficient system.
So looking at just the numbers, it's a very easy decision. How much does emotion play into your decision making or producers' decision making? Yeah,
well, I think psychology is a big part of it. In terms of emotion playing into mine, well, ask my family and they'll tell you none. But in terms of emotion playing into my clients, look, it's a big part of it. I guess what I've learnt, and I like to think I'm a rational thinker, and as soon as I say that, I know I'm not, because the psychology, tells me I'm not. But the reality is that people do make emotional decisions, and the psychology actually plays on people's ability to make rational decisions. I guess what I've learnt in my journey of career and so on is that you need to take everything into account. So when I was a young whippersnapper, I would just say, well, here's the numbers, they're the only thing to look at, just get in and change. Now I like to think I'm less dogmatic. I can take the fact that not everyone wants to achieve the absolute uppermost profitability performance. They might just want to take it back 20% or 30%, and they're happy to go a little less hard to get a result that's still within their realm, because that suits their personality profile and their risk profile and their decision-making profile and that sort of thing. So, and you got to remember that if I present numbers that show performance, what's not shown there is how bloody hard it is to actually get that performance. So it's quite a trap. People say, oh yeah, they're the numbers, I'll just go and get it. But what I'm not telling you, and what's not seen in the numbers on a page, is this is hard work. So if I go from a system where I've got thrift in my livestock and I'm at a suboptimal stocking rate, and I can look at those livestock and think, oh, they don't look exactly right, but I'll come back to them in a week's time, and I move to a system where I'm really pushing productivity and I'm on the edge, a week they might not be there. So it's a very different system. I've got to really fine-tune my management, and that can take a while, and it takes skill building. So I don't think it's acceptable for me just to say, there's the number, let's go and pursue it. You actually have to put a bit of a plan in place where you actually, guide people along that pathway, and you give them some sort of tools to understand that this isn't going to be easy. And if it turns dry, it's not going to be pretty either. You're going to have to manage, and you're going to have to manage very quickly and efficiently. So decision making and the ability to make decisions quickly is really important in that system. That doesn't mean you'll always be right, but you really do need to, to have some tools in your toolbox before you just jump in.
We're experiencing some really dry times, not so much here in this eastern part of Gippsland, but right across the state of Victoria at the moment and through much of Australia. How does planning for those dry times factor into the architecture of the systems design that you guys do?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think the feed budget is a big part of the planning process. So I don't think you can pursue these production goals without having a feed budget behind you. So the feed budget really helps inform the decision making, in my opinion. So to give you an example, what we do is map out different types of pasture for each month of the year, and that might have a certain growth rate. And then I might have 5 different pasture types, and then I work out what proportion of the whole farm is each of those pasture types. The weighted average pasture growth rate across the farm is basically the area multiplied by each of those pasture growth rates by month. Now what I've got is a feed supply curve, and I know how much feed I'm growing. The next part that I'll do is then look at my production system and think, how can I actually map that out? The next step that I take is then saying, right, now let's sensitise this. If I don't get the feed, which might be minus 50% in spring, what does that look like? And that might mean, I've now got no feed across the farm, which is unacceptable, of course. I need some cover at some point in time. What that also does is inform me about how much supplementary feed I need, or the extent to which I need to sell down. So I think the planning process is very important. It won't be right. No plan is, because we're looking into the future. We don't know what the future is going to be. But what I want to project is, do I have enough cash to actually fund a shortfall in feed, which might mean more supplementary feed, or it could mean I'm going to sell livestock and then buy in later. So I think that situation we're in at the moment is really one that is a particularly challenging one. I don't think it's a surprising one. When we have a drought, a spring drought, it pulls into the next autumn. Where I think the real challenge is this time of year. So people have gone for the ride from September to now, and now is when they lose mental fortitude. They've invested a lot in supplementary feeding these animals. The market's at a low, but they don't have the mental fortitude to ride it out for another couple of months, and they say, I'm too over it, I've got to go. Well, I think if they can get some support to ride it through, it's worth riding it through, because you're so close. Can I guarantee you're so close? Absolutely not. But, typically a break occurs in autumn to winter, so you're not that far away. I think the challenge for people at the moment is they've done 6 or 7 months and they're in the mental grind and all the rest. So if you can just, again, easier said than done, but if you can check out or check in with someone else and they can support you through, then I think there's some value added there.
Now, I've got written down here Trump.
Right.
And when you only have to say the first name or the last name, it's a big deal. But market changes and challenges. What's your take? Because we're seeing a lot of good times, a lot of bad times recently. A massive change in leadership over there.
Yes.
Where are we at with that?
You've asked me a day too early, I think.
Yeah.
Isn't the... Look, Trumpy, we're not being... I hope we've got we're on air. Sorry, yeah. I could be assassinated tomorrow. Now, look, I think it's challenging times for us at the moment. I I think it'll be challenging times for prime lamb, and I think it'll be challenging times for beef. Can I project what the extent of the downside is from the proposed tariffs? Absolutely not, but this just plays further into my discussion about why you need to drive a low cost of production. We are price takers, and we don't have any say over the price that we receive for our product. To that extent, we are similar to the coal miner who is a commodity producer. Now, how do they deal with it? They produce as much coal as is sensible from a cost structure which is sensible. We've got to do exactly the same. So if we take a hit of 10%, say, over the whole herd, and I don't know what it's going to be, but if we take that hit, then it puts even more emphasis on my ability to drive a low cost of production. It means I've got to get even more disciplined about the cost structure I've got and understand the production targets I've got. So my advice would be, if I don't know what my production is per hectare or per DSE or per hectare per 100 mils or whatever metric you use, or my cost of production is, then now is a good time to start, because we're going to come under pressure. We've come under the pressure from high commodity prices to low commodity prices, and we all let things go a little bit slack when the commodity prices were high. It's now time to lean up. And so if you don't know the answer to those questions, well, I think that's a really important message from me. Start to know what your production is. Now, that's not sales. A lot of people think, well, I know how many kilos I sold. Production isn't sales. And if you don't know the difference, then again, I think it's a good time to start your journey into learning a bit more about the business side. So maybe get out of the paddock and out of the operational and start, doing what this group has done. Form a group and get into it, because there's some real power in the numbers.
If we were wanting to start a group, what's the best place? Is it to contact someone like Arista to set something up? Yeah,
so we're always happy to take on new groups, but I'm conscious that we don't want to be fighting with Victorian Farm Monitor program, and we could be, we are in the same space. I'm indifferent about where you go for the information or to form a group. So if you're in Victoria, the beauty is that there is actually a government support here to actually do it, which I think is really powerful. I'd prefer you came to me, of course, because I've got a vested interest and I derive income from you coming to me. But I don't think we're that big a competitors. The beauty of what we both do is we respect what each other does. We both think that there's value back to our clients, and we're both trying to achieve the same objective, which is for us to grow our clients' business and to improve the financial literacy and the productivity and performance of our clients. So whatever the pathway, I'm happy, but if you want to come to Arista, I'm even more happy. I think you go to agrista.com.au and someone will be right back to you and start the journey for you.
You just did mention the Agriculture Victoria Livestock Farm Monitor project. We shared a bit about that at the recent Gippsland Red Meat Conference. It's a project that you can find on the Agriculture Victoria website. You can sign up and get your information in there and get a benchmark. The advantage with the Livestock Farm Monitor from Agriculture Victoria is you do get that emissions intensity profile on your farm, which is another factor that's coming through. So encourage producers in that direction if that's something they're thinking about.
All right, and our last question, John, you've been blindsided by this. It's normally gets sent out weeks before, but what is one thing you've learnt recently that has actually surprised you?
Oh, gee, you have blindsided me.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be ag-related. One of our last ones was that porcupines can live up to 40 years old. And you can't use that one because you've just learnt that.
No, it's got to be personal here. It's got to be something personal, because my family are just constantly surprising me with the idiotic things they do. Okay, here's one. We went to a Fatboy Slim concert the other day, and I learnt why my kids love the festival so much. It was fantastic. There was such a good vibe about it, and it was something I don't do frequently, believe it or not. I don't go to a lot of Fatboy Slim concerts, but my kids are into the festivals. I don't want to know what they do when they're there, but certainly the vibe and the atmosphere was absolutely electric, and it was fantastic to see. So I can see why they spend their hard-earned on festivals.
Yeah, that's a good one. I enjoyed that. So thank you, John, for coming in. We've appreciated having you down and appreciated making time for this session today. Thank you.
Thanks very much for having me.
A big thank you for tuning in today. And remember, if you have a question about today's episode or a topic you'd like us to cover, reach out to one of our many platforms and join the conversation. We're here because of your passion and commitment to agriculture. Together, we can build a stronger farming future.
This podcast is made possible by the Future Drought Fund Regional Drought Resilience Planning Program, co-funded by the Victorian and Australian governments.